diverse voices in the energy revolution. Here's your host, Amy Simpkins. Hello and welcome back to the Power Flow podcast. I'm your host, Amy Simpkins, and today we are talking with Kameale Terry. Kameale is the founder and CEO of ChargerHelp Incorporated, an app that enables on-demand repair of electric vehicle charging stations. As the former director of programs at EV Connect, an electric vehicle charge station network provider, Kameale structured and led teams to execute electric vehicle infrastructure projects and programs in the United States, Australia, and Canada for commercial and government entities. Her most notable projects include the Electrify America Phase 1 program, the Southern California Edison Charge Ready pilot, and the New York Power Authority portfolio. Prior to this role, Kameale created, hired, and oversaw the Customer Experience Department at EV Connect by partnering with the South Bay Workforce Investment Board to employ candidates from the local community. As a South Central Los Angeles native, Kameale believes that an equitable green economy can be achieved through impactful workforce development and realignment. Welcome to the show, Kameale.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you today, to dive more into your expertise and to talk about electric vehicles. Such a huge topic right now. Everyone wants to know, what's happening with electric vehicles. So let's talk about you for a second. How did you why electric vehicles? How did you come into it? How'd that happen?
Yeah, so funny story. I started off in the nonprofit world, and then I was a banker. I was a banker in Philadelphia, and I had to move back to LA to take care of my mom. And I applied to a job on AngelList that just so happened to be a company that created software for EV charging stations. And so for me, this industry, I kind of stumbled into. But being, from South Central LA, it really wasn't until I started working at that company did I understand how the environment was impacting my livelihood. And so I'm very happy that I stumbled into it because it definitely opened up so much for me.
Absolutely. So you stumbled into this work, doing software for charging stations, and from there to CEO. What was that path like?
Yeah, so I used to be the lovely voice that answered all of the calls when an EV driver had an issue at a charging station. So I got to field thousands of calls from all over the U.S. of people that weren't, having the greatest experience. And the cool thing about a startup is that you get to touch a lot of different departments. So at the company I was at, I ended up being able to stand up our call center and a customer experience department and our network operations center. And so my team was responsible for building out the infrastructure all throughout the US. And we did some really cool projects in Canada and Australia. But for us, it was really super easy to find electricians to put stations in the ground. But when our stations started to break, it was extremely difficult to, number one, find folks that were local that could get there in a matter of moments. And number two, someone that really understood, the software components, not necessarily the electrical, because we were seeing that 80% of our issues were non-electrical, that it had to do with everything else outside of electricity. So my electricians were like, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And really, that's where the idea of ChargerHelp came about. Was like, hey, we need a workforce that can solve these issues quickly. And why not create net new jobs while doing it?
Amazing. And can we just pause for a minute and say, being the person that's on the phone when the equipment doesn't work, can we just honor that for a minute? That's a tough job. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've definitely been one of those irate customers, not in vehicle charging stations, but oh wow. And was that part of the motivation for creating an app, or was does the app work with the consumer or with the charging station company?
Yeah, so the app works with the charging station company, because what usually has to happen is that the manufacturer has to diagnose the issue over the air. But sometimes, well, not sometimes, most times, they're really not able to do it over the air, and they still need someone to go out on site. And so when they determine that someone needs to go out on site, they pass the ticket over to us, and that automatically dispatches our technician to go and troubleshoot the station. And the reason why we chose to do an app is really for two reasons. One is that 100% of our technicians are new to this industry. Half of them are from the oil and gas industry. We have folks that used to work at manufacturing industries that shut down factories. And so they're new. So setting them to get retrained for months and months and months didn't make sense to me. And so what our app does with our technician is that it's truly a workflow. So it tells the technician exactly what to do when they go on site. And because the software changes all the time and how you troubleshoot software changes all the time, we wanted to utilize technology to bridge that gap for our technicians and allow them to do the things they do really well, which is like problem solve, which is ask really good questions, which is like paying attention to safety and dealing with an irate site host when you get there. Like those are the things I want my technicians to be really good at. And the technical stuff I can solve with the app.
I love all that so much, that it's a holistic approach to problem solving and to troubleshooting, not just about the tech. And I love what you said before too about that 80% of the trouble isn't with the physical hardware. It's with the software. It's a software problem.
Well, more so that it's not electrical. So it might be a parts issue. It might be a software issue, but it doesn't have anything to really do with electricity. And when you do have an electrical issue, mainly it's an installation problem that went wrong. And you probably need to contact your utility. So what we're solving for is all of that other stuff.
No, that's awesome. I do want to talk about that workforce stuff, and I know that's a passion of yours. So we'll get to that in a minute. But before we go there, I want to stick with electric vehicles and ask just some more about that. In my experience, even just talking to friends who are lay people and not in the industry, I feel a lot of consumer interest in electric vehicles. And of course, there's electric vehicles at the fleet level, transportation systems and busing and things like that. And then there's just like, in the rest of renewable energy, there's like the commercial level and the residential level. And here there's like the fleet level. And then there's, the consumer level. People are really interested in electric vehicles. They're saying like, when am I going to feel comfortable purchasing an electric vehicle, and how actually does that work? And in my limited understanding, it seems like what's holding a lot of people back is a lack of faith that the infrastructure exists out there. Would you agree, disagree? What do you have to say about that?
I think that it's rapidly happening at the same time. Does the current infrastructure support folks that don't have charging stations at their home or at their workplace? Not fully, but I do think that there is something interesting about like range anxiety and people having a good understanding of how often they actually do drive. Because I think about, when I had a gas powered car and like, I thought I may have driven like far distances, but not really. Like it was very local. So I think that some of it is a bit, may not be fully supported, right? But at the end of the day, it's a lot of things aren't actuality, but it's how people feel. So if people feel that there's not a lot of charging stations, then we have to honor that feeling, because it's very hard to change a feeling, right? So I definitely think that there's opportunity, but I'm excited that there's so many charging stations that's going to be going in the ground, especially what Biden-Harris is doing, a lot of work out of Electrify America, and a lot of the dollars that were already allocated through some of the utility programs. So the really cool part is that infrastructure is being built every single day. So this problem of not having enough charging stations, or the feeling of not having enough charging stations, I don't think that it's going to last that much longer.
Yeah, wow, that's happening really fast. And it's incredible to be like in the middle of it, to kind of see it happening, right?
No, absolutely. It's a beautiful thing that one day we'll be able to look back and say we were part of the generation that really changed the trajectory of the health of our nation in regards to air quality. Because at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, charging stations, charging stations, charging stations. But like really what we're trying to impact is like the air that we breathe. I live in LA and I tell you, every time I go anywhere like hiking, I'm like, is it smog or is it fog? Like, I don't know.
Oh, man.
Like, it looks gross. So, like, I think that's the thing that we have to think about is like, as humans, right, the going to electric vehicles is not a nice to have. It's a must have. Like, we are breathing in really, really gross stuff and it's impacting like our livelihood. Like, that's something that, you know, if I have a little bit of range anxiety, like I'm okay with that. If I understand that, like, no, this is actually impacting like my health and the people that I love. Like, I think that's the story that should be really, you know, thought more about.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so much in there to unpack. So I live outside Denver, Colorado, and Denver, it sits in kind of a basin a little bit. It's next to the Rocky Mountains, but it sits in this little valley before it goes back up to the plains. And they've had, you know, over the course of, ever since I moved there, which was in 2004, which actually is quite a long time ago compared to other people who are recent transplants to Colorado. Yeah. But they called it the brown cloud that would come sit down in that Denver basin. And it would happen like a small handful of days in the year. Well, currently, as we speak, Denver has just had its record longest period of air quality advisory days in a row.
Get out.
And initially they were like, well, that's the wildfires in Oregon. No, it's actually not. Oh, like, wow. It's our own pollution. It's our own consumption. And, you know, I feel like people generally in the Denver area like to pat themselves on the back for being nice and progressive about issues like energy. And we like to boast our, you know, spirit of the outdoors and all of that. But like, we have to see this change, you know, we have to make this change happen, because you're totally right. We get bogged down. Technologists like to get bogged down talking about the technology, but really it's about air quality.
No, it's a health issue.
It's a health issue. And it's, you know, it's both planet and people. Mm-hmm. You know, it's protecting the planet and, you know, it's climate change issues, but it's like you said, it's a health issue for actual people.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I always say, like, people that get confused about climate change or don't understand it, I'm always like, if there's a better way to do this, then why not just do it? You know what I mean? And like, we know that oil and gas is like gross. Like, you just see the emissions and the soot and the dirt. Like, that can't be good. Like, like that cannot be good. Like, even for somebody that doesn't know a lot about science, like, I can see emissions and like see that stuff is browny, like, you know, yucky. And I'm like,
it looks gross.
I really don't want to breathe that. Like, yeah, that doesn't seem fun. So like, if there's a new way to do things, and the one thing that I'm super excited about when you talk about electric cars is the opportunity of bringing the future forward, right? It's like, there's so many more things that you can now do in your cars by them being electric. We see what Tesla has done. We see what the Roadster and a lot of these new cars that are coming out, even Rivian, like, you can just reimagine transportation, and we can't do that with the engine. Like, it's not the same. It's too heavy. It's too much stuff. You can't really integrate computer into it. So it's like, let's have the future right now. Like, let's reimagine transportation. Let's reimagine how we take care of the environment and the things that we create and the impact of the things that we create. Like, let's reimagine that. Like, it's totally time to do it.
Yeah, to be able to say, I think a lot of the fear, and this gets back to that fear component, like, ooh, will there be enough charging infrastructure? Ooh, well, you know, how does long distance driving work? Ooh, like all of those fears are opportunities for innovation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Opportunities for a new idea. You know, how could we do it differently, better? Like you said, like, if there's a better way to do it, why shouldn't we?
Right.
And then you were saying that, you know, seeing people take a little bit more responsibility, I think that's the next generation wave of what's coming. Mm-hmm. And I see that sort of across the energy industry, that, like, you know, how you drive and what you drive matters, and the emissions from your driving matter, and also how you use electricity at home matters, and I think that's a common theme that I'm seeing is giving regular consumers the language that they need and just a little bit of background knowledge to understand where power comes from. And it's not just from turning the light switch on.
No, absolutely. And I think and adding to that, it's making some of these things no brainers. One of my biggest pet peeves in the beginning with, getting introduced to this industry was how ugly EVs were. When EVs first came out, they were not sexy cars. And for some reason they were always weird colors. I remember the first EVs being it was the only car that was a highlighter green. And I was just why? Who's going to buy that? And so it's we have such an opportunity to create really cool products that people just naturally integrate with, right? I think that there's such opportunity to create a culture of where people care about where their electricity comes in. A lot of times it's not telling people, but it's creating the environment that, of course, they would want to know more, right? And so it's how do we make these products cool? How do we make them sexy? How do we make them something that it's of course you want to use it. I have so many Apple products. I don't even know if there's a better product out there. I drink the Kool-Aid. You know what I mean? And it's every time I buy a new product, I'm it got to be Apple because of the design, and it's easy and it's a no-brainer for me to have it. How do we do that with the clean energy industry within all of the components of clean energy?
Right. How do we make it feel good to use it? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So I'm curious, changing gears just a little bit here. And this gets back a little bit to part of the fear thing. Another thing that I've heard about, I've heard come up several times recently about electric vehicle penetration is load growth. And obviously, as we're moving towards an all electric future, there's a lot of different things that are contributing to load growth, including possibly heating. But EVs are a huge chunk, right, of things that becoming electrified. And I know, you're in California in particular. And so even though I know the reach is wider than that, but coming kind of from that Californian perspective, you've also got that duck curve problem, right, where they've got a ton of solar producing right now, but having trouble moving it out of that midday. And when everyone wants to come home and kick up their air conditioning and cook their dinners and, oh, by the way, plug in their EVs, the sun is going down. And we're seeing this huge spike on the grid. And that doesn't even, take into account setting aside what's currently happening with heat spikes. And I heard they're starting rolling blackouts again, possibly this week, as soon as this week, due to load on the grid. Talk to me about load growth from EVs and from your chair, even though it's not quite, what you're working on right now, but what kind of needs to happen around that?
I think honestly, from my perspective, is that we still need more ideals. You know what I mean? We still need more people in the arena of figuring out the best way to do this. I know that a lot of people lean into battery storage, but then there's limitations there as well. A lot of people that lean into how do you decentralize the grid. I just think that we're at the beginning of this and we still need support and ideals to say that it's crazy that the sun can do all of these things, but we haven't figured out a way to fully take advantage of that. You know what I mean? And so that just means that there's still growth and opportunity for more startups, more ideals, more investments into this industry. Because once again, going back is not just a nice to have. These are things that we're going to have to figure out for the livelihood of our existence. We got to figure it out. And so, well, the other thing that I'll add for us, one of the reasons why it's so important for the maintenance and uptime of the charging station is because a lot of what we do, it has to do with the software, which enables, load management, which enables, not overloading the grid. And so having standards and having things that says that these stations, yes, they have to be up and running, but like they do need software, and we do need to continue to utilize that software and make sure that it's working, so that way we can, make sure that we're not putting too much load on the grid. So I think, like, summarizing my answers, it's like, number one, we still need more ideas, because I think there's still opportunity for new solutions. And number two, there needs to be a standard of maintenance of these charging stations, because one of the things that we found is that because installation and maintenance is always coupled, we don't see that there's maintenance dollars there. And even with the Biden-Harris administration plan, they don't separate it out. So most of these charging stations, they get put in the ground, and no one thought about what happens when it doesn't work. What happens when it's not a parts issue and it's not underneath parts warranty? What do we do then? And so we've been on our little soapbox of saying like, hey, super cool, install the stuff, but let's once again think a little bit more critically about the things that we're doing. How do we maintain the infrastructure? How do we make sure that our dollars aren't going to waste? Because what we see on our side is that site hosts rip out charging stations when they don't work anymore. That's what they do. They put them in the closet and they're like, that was cute. Thanks for trying. No one came to fix this thing, or it's too expensive to keep it maintained. There's no standard on upkeep. Nobody cares that it's not working. So I'm going to rip this nice little device out of the ground.
Oh, that's tough. That's painful. Oh.
Yeah, no, it really is.
No, I think we see the same thing like from the solar side, that people, especially since solar is a little bit more mature as a deployed commercial technology, that I think there tends to be an assumption there around it. And I think people even sometimes use the word maintenance free, like around solar. And you're like, oh, you guys, like, or they look at, we do at my company, MuGrid, we do a lot of like cost modeling for projects. And, they'll look at the maintenance line and be like, well, that's too big. Like, we'll just assume that it's half of that. And we're like, you can't just do that. Like, I think there is, humans are really bad at it. This is funny. I think humans are generally really bad at risk management, but most of the time we like overestimate a downside. But in this case, like we get really optimistic that like you're paying all this money to install whatever the infrastructure is. And like, well, that'll be that. It'll just be, It'll just work.
And then to me, like, it makes sense because, like, especially with a lot of the early contracts, it was the ideal of getting people bought into it, right? Like how hard of a sell that would have been is like, hey, you're going to have to pay, we're going to cover the cost of installation, or even like the commissions that had to approve. Hey, we're going to have this thing. It's this new technology and like this installation. And like, actually, we're separating from the gas model where a private entity owns the attendant that takes care of the infrastructure. Now we also have to take care of the infrastructure. I feel like it would have been a hard sell because it is a lot of money. However, we're now at the time where it's like, we're committed. We have car OEMs that are saying that they're switching to full electric. And of course they can go back on their word, but like, we're at a point now that we just have to be like, okay, and now we need to make sure we maintenance it. And then the really, really cool thing, especially about what we're doing at ChargerHelp, is that it's net new jobs. That we figured out a way to give people $30 an hour, to give them full health benefits, to give them shares in a company, to transition them from oil and gas, to take care of the infrastructure. So yes, it's spend, but however, it's creating real middle-class jobs of people that are currently displaced. So I think when you tie it to that, it seems less of a money hole and more so of an opportunity for new green jobs to usher us into the new green future.
Yeah, well, the whole thing feels like a momentum shift
right
there. So that is a great place to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about that all-electric future. Back with the Power Flow podcast. We're talking with Kameale Terry today from ChargerHelp, talking about electric vehicles and that all-electric future and how vehicle electrification is coming into that. But right now, I want to shift from talking about kind of the status quo and all the projects that are happening right now to increase EV penetration, and talk about the future, because that's what we do here on PowerFlow is, envision the future, allow ourselves to dream a little bit, and then maybe start to have some of those ideas. I think if you take one thing away from this episode, right, it's that like every challenge or fear around change is an opportunity for ideas. And I think that's like the main message here. So Kameale, tell me, what do you think is the biggest challenge, problem, roadblock standing between our society today and the new clean energy economy or the all electric future?
Yeah, one of the we've been talking about this whole time. I really think it's going to be maintaining the charging stations. I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we don't invest in the maintenance of the things we put in the ground. And one of the other challenges that we've seen is that when we limit the people that are sitting at the table to make some of these decisions, we have a little bit of oversight. So recently, our team has been working on adding comments to the infrastructure bill because there's been this huge shift to require that maintenance is included in what they're calling an EVITP certification. So basically, the only people that can maintain charging stations will be certified electricians. And the first thing that we talked about earlier was that 80% of the issues are non-electrical. And so it's like, once again, like when we allow the table to be very small on who's proposing laws, or like we're not really getting out into the, to see who's actually touching these things, then you get a very one-sided look at the problem. And so we've been doing, everything that we can to go out and tell our story more and talk to politicians and talk to Capitol Hill and just say like, hey, actually, like, we should probably be at the table. This is what maintenance does. Like, it shouldn't include, electrical contractors because it's not electrical work. Like, my electricians don't want to take a computer out to a charging station and plug in a Cat 5. They don't want to do it, which is respect, because that's not in their job description. So I think like that's one of the things that I'm definitely worried about, is just like us being short-sighted and just seeing a lot of money and then everybody just grabbing and not having a good ideal to like what this process should actually look like based off of our learnings, right? From the pilots that have been done that has said these are the types of issues and the things that they've seen. Yeah.
Do you feel like in a lot of ways, policymakers, the makers of standards, and in more than just that, though, even like project developers keep trying to fit square pegs of the new technology and new ways of doing business into the round holes of the way we used to do them? Like, we're seeing, for example, on the buildings side, that like, commercial buildings projects are always done in like with design build or design bid build. And we're trying to fit energy project design and contracting into that same box without saying, how is this actually different? And what would warrant more adaptation? And I heard you say something similar, which kind of made me think of that, of like, like sending a licensed electrician to the site, because you're like, well, it has to do with electricity and we understand electricity. We've been doing that for 150 years, even though this is a completely new thing. Do you feel like that's a challenge right now of like trying to break old mindsets?
Yeah, and I definitely think that it's also just like a part of the process. Like, change regardless is like hard. And I think that it's helpful to have voices such as ours to be like, hey, like, did you think of this? But what we have to get better at is like, how do we source those voices? Who's actually in the room? Like how are we allowing for critique in a structured way? Because like, it's going to be hard. Right. But I definitely think that, and then right on top of that, people have to be willing to change. They have to be willing to say like, oh, actually, you're right. And we should probably do this thing a different way. Or I'm interested in an incremental change. But I definitely think how we've done things in the past, to me so far, at least within our industry, I think that we would do a disservice if we didn't learn from any of those poor outcomes of how we did things in the past. Right. Like,
That's fair.
yeah, like at bare minimum, it'd be like, oh, well, that probably didn't work that way. Or these are the shortcomings. How do I, do a new iteration? That's one of the things I'm excited about with technology and product and like even design thinking. Like a lot of these things are about iterations, like small iterative changes that addresses a specific problem. Because I get it. We can't like completely blow everything up and start anew because then you'll end up with new problems. But at least this thing, a lot of things we've done in the past, we know a lot of stuff about it. Right. So why don't we use a lot of that stuff that we know in order to get, better, faster, stronger as we move forward?
Oh, you're speaking my language. I am an iterative development nerd and try to like preach, the power of iteration and not needing to solve the whole problem in one fell swoop. Right. So how do we do that? How do we get more people in the room? I hesitate to say even the right people in the room because that suggests limitation, I think, in and of itself. But like, how do we source that knowledge and those ideas? What do you think?
Yeah, I think at least on the policy front, I just wish there was easier ways to, number one, know about bills that are coming up and then to provide comment. Like, it's been so interesting. We've been able to get into rooms, but just because we like know people. But I'm just thinking, I was like, man, like if it's hard for us like to do this just because we know like some heavy hitters, like I couldn't imagine like the everyday citizen, like everybody's not going to be able to sit down and write a letter and put it in a postage mail. Like there's so many things around technology and ways that we can like source ideals that I think we haven't really dug into, but just like the way that we're currently doing it feels very archaic, specifically around policy front, which is like really, the one that's driving a lot of things in clean technology right now. Even holding like in-person open forums, like we see how that transitioned to Zoom, and then even with Zoom, it's like, that's not the best way to source ideals. So I think there's just a huge opportunity to be able to source more ideals, to get more ideals in the room, to start figuring out how do we do iteration from this larger set of ideals. I don't know what that thing is, but I think that what we're doing right now isn't working because what it does, to your point, is it creates the space to say, well, I have the right people in the room. And who are really the right people? It may just be people who like donated to a campaign or people who's just close to so-and-so's brother. So they're now the right people. So I think it's less about having the right ideals, but then more so allowing to have more ideals. And then we can figure out how do you cipher through those ideals in order to get to that iterative solution process. Yeah.
I think that's really the key right there is maybe not sourcing the ideas in the first place, although that's certainly like there's got to be a mechanism for that. But then once you welcome a broader set of perspectives that are going to seed those ideas, how do you prioritize them, cull them? Okay, so I'm a innovation nerd, right? An iterative implementation nerd, and like there's generally like, I mean, this is an oversimplification. I hate people who make up like arbitrary binaries, but here we go anyway. It's a constant fluctuation back and forth between divergent thinking, which is like idea generation,
right,
and convergent thinking, where you need to like cull out the ideas or at least prioritize and say, this is what we're going to work on first. This is what we're going to work on second. And then you take the thing you're going to work on first and you would diverge again and say, okay, now we're working on this particular thing. How do we go about this? Diverge on that. But then we need to converge. And I think it's really hard to converge, even if you like everyone who's in the room with you, because then you have to like call some people's babies ugly. Like, you have to find a way to let some things go so that you can focus as a group, as a community, as an industry, whatever the scale is. But then you throw in obviously the challenges that we have right now with incredible, divisiveness, and in politics, policy, and like that, it makes it even harder. So I agree with you. Like there's that initial divergence of like, let's make sure we have lots of voices, lots of perspectives from areas of the project lifecycle, from areas of the country, from diversity of experience, making sure we have that breadth of ideas and perspectives, but then we have to also handle this convergence. You know,
Mm-hmm.
how does that work in a way that we can actually get something done?
Yeah. And then is it one solution? Like that's the other thing, right? Like I think sometimes people have this ideal that it has to be like this one way, but like sometimes it's also like who actually implements this. I feel like now we're just gonna live in theory real quick. But like to me, it's like also like, you know, you get to a solution and like, sure, this might be a great solution, but you as the implementer might not be the greatest implementer for that solution. Like there's that happens often, right? And then like what type of process do you have? We're doing this right now. We're building out our app, right? And we go between like waterfall and a more of a traditional way to like build because we're already in market, right? So we're just like, do we just build the thing and, you know, we open up space to iterate afterwards, or is it a consistent iteration? And for us, we made the decision of like, no, we're just going to build it. We're going to build it where it's flexible enough to do tweaks, but we don't have time to consistently iterate because we're in market. Like we are here. Like, and I don't want to test a whole bunch of stuff on my customers and then they don't like it. Right. And we already have a sound product, so we can do that, but we made that decision. And is it going to be the right decision? But I think for me as an implementer, I'm better at like a more waterfall approach that this is what we're going to do. And then we go out and then I receive feedback because like that's my strength. I know how to produce that and manage that instead of a super ongoing iteration. Like I wouldn't be able to be good at that. But I think that two things is just, you know, there has to be, yes, we come down to like, this is what we're going to do, but it doesn't always have to be just one thing. It could be multiple things. You allow people to compete, you get feedback from the market. And usually if you allow it to be free, you know, the best person should naturally arise. The issue is when we mingle and meddle and nudge.
I love theory, by the way. I could live in theory. I wish I could live in theory. But let's bring it back now to something more practical that I really wanted to get to, because again, I know it's a passion of yours, and that's the workforce development. I think what you're doing with around job creation, middle-class job creation, is huge. It's very, very tactical. It's a very tactical solution to a much broader problem. And you as kind of like only one person or only one company, you know, are taking a huge bite out of that. And then also combining that, like just middle-class job creation with the transfer of skills from other industries, particularly oil and gas, because I think that's been a huge resistance to clean energy adoption, you know, in the world of politics is, well, what about oil and gas jobs? Like, you know, I think the oil and gas sector, you know, is afraid, has some fear, and also sometimes makes even a bigger deal out of that, as happens in politics, that like someone's coming after their jobs. And here what you're doing is making a transfer of jobs. So talk to me about that for a little bit. Talk to me about the workforce development stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause one of my first kind of like, frustrations too was this ideal that even like solar did this. Solar, when they went out and did a lot of like this workforce development, a lot of the people that ended up on the roofs that were making $15 an hour and not actually good pay were like Black and brown people from that community. Like you did not see a lot of people progress into project managers and project coordinators and engineers. There wasn't a pathway for that, but they're like, we got jobs. And they're the people that are on the roofs in the heat installing solar panels. And so that was a really big critique for me. And it was very frustrating to see because, like, to be honest, like, I can't really hate on oil and gas for trying to protect their jobs. Because, like, if you think about it's definitely a higher safety risk, but they are getting paid more than what we're putting up as green jobs today. And so that's why when we went out to do the company, it was really like, there is opportunity to create equitable jobs here. But once again, like we talked about, we cannot do it the same way. You can't just say, oh, well, labor work, this is that, and this is a quick and easy way to get people trained, and like that's it. And then now they got jobs, and we're not thinking about the type of jobs, the quality of life. Because then you're doing the same stuff with oil and gas, where it's like, yeah, you paid them well, but you're not thinking about their health. So it's like we're still doing the same stuff. So what we wanted to say is like, hey, how do I, number one, pay someone a middle-class wage? And not because it's a nice to have, because it's good business. I require a lot out of the people who work for me. And because I require a lot out of them, I don't ever want any of my workers having to think about taking on a second job.
Mm-hmm.
Those 40 hours are my time. You know what I mean?
Right.
If that means that I'm not paying you enough, so you got to reduce your hours to have another job, when I could just pay you enough so that way you can give me your 110%, you know? Or with health insurance, we contribute toward health insurance. Why wouldn't I want the people who work for me to be healthy? That's weird. Because when they get sick and they have to leave the job or they can't pay for something and they're stressed out and they're not focused on working, that hurts the business. So to us, like when we think about workforce development, we really are saying that this is good business. This isn't a nice to have. You look at what happened to Uber and a lot of these places where they treated people like they were not humans. They don't stay loyal to you, you know, and it doesn't produce a good society. And so we wanted to really figure out, like, what's the best way to take care of people? Because when you take care of people, they take care of you. That's something. My mom passed away last month. And I tell you that I had to it was really crazy, but I had to take time, you know, to deal with affairs. The company was fine. Right? Because I take care of my people before stuff like this happens. And so everybody took up and was able to help out. And so that's like our biggest part is just like, this is just how you should do business. You should just take care of people, like, period. And then the second part of it is saying that I've been in rooms where people who have had very fancy college degrees have gone to the Oxfords and the Andersons and the Harvards of the world. And I tell you, when it comes down to just personal skills and being able to problem solve, they either lack it or they're not any better than someone that I know that doesn't even have a high school diploma, but has figured their way out of how to navigate life against all odds and have been successful. There is no difference between them and their ability to contribute. So if I'm looking at what is the best person that's able to contribute and do this job, and I actually can point to that a college degree does not equate that, then why am I requiring a college degree?
Totally.
Then why? Like, and so, but what we then have to do is like, okay, then what is the process, right? So we decided to hire in a cohort model, right? Because of how long our recruitment process is. We recruit and our entire process, it's a 2-month process. And so we hire in batches of technicians. So this first batch, we did 20 techs. We had 1,600 people apply. And it's like, look what happened when you remove barriers. And in that 1,600 people, that's where we found folks that like, oh yeah, I used to work on, you know, the equipment that made the cardboard boxes. And that's like software and hardware. He don't got a college degree, but he's like, has this like 11 years of just like, I can't train that. I can't get 11 years of somebody knowing how to problem solve, or even people that have had to navigate our government system, which is a system to navigate, honey. Like,
oh man, you're not kidding.
Like a tactical organization that you might need. That is it right there. So it's like, we then created a system that started off with what we needed. And for me, it's like, I will solve for technical gaps with my app. That's how we utilize technology. But what I need is problem solvers. I need people that can identify patterns. I need people that can talk to people when they're really upset, because that is a talent.
It is such a gift.
And if those are the top 3 things that I need, you know, how do I create a process that does that? And so the cool part is we ended up with this really cool batch of folks that, like, we didn't go out and seek oil and gas people. That's just the people that fell through that actually made it, right? We didn't go out and say, oh, we're only hiring Black and brown people. No, I want good people. Like, this is not charity work. Like, I want people to compete. But just so happens that more than 60% of our technicians are Black and brown people. You know what I mean? So it's like, when you remove barriers and actually go after like finding the talent, you know, that you need in order to solve your problems, you'll be surprised about what you get. And that's what our workforce development, you know, really strategy has been, and what we're looking at fine tuning as we go back out to recruit later this year.
Well, first, I just want to say, I'm so sorry to hear about your mom. So much compassion.
Thank you.
And obviously there's the grieving process, and then yes, working through all the affairs. I've been there. I know what a full-time job that is, actually. So, definitely. But also, so back to the workforce development piece. It's funny because I think there's this this drive, and you hear it around government, the big government organizations, DOE, DOD. They want to drive down soft costs. Like that's what's in the eyes of the government, what's standing in the way of, clean energy tech, renewable energy penetration is these high soft costs. And it's like, do you know what soft costs are? Soft costs are investments in people.
Right.
Without any equipment or technology in the way.
Right.
And you just totally reframed that for me. That because it's funny because I work on soft costs too, doing modeling analysis, the upfront design work, all of that is people power. Mm-hmm. I work very little with actual hardware. Mm-hmm. But I have in the past been known to say the same thing, like, oh, we can drive these soft costs right down. But reframing that as investing in people. And I said it before and I'll say it again. I love this holistic approach of it's about the technology. It's about the infrastructure. It's about clean tech, but it's also about empowering people, mm-hmm. supporting people, providing more health for people, not just in the air quality improvement of the technology, but also by providing these jobs that they are healthier jobs and they pay well. So I love that it's so holistic, so all-encompassing, and trying to simultaneously solve a whole bunch of different challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really happened that way. And you know what? Like the cool thing is we know we're not going to be perfect in it, but at least it's going to be an alternative. And then maybe somebody else has a better way to do it. And we'll keep iterating. But we just want to say that hey, technology, so far, a lot of tech companies has really not done the best by their people, whether that's through the 1099 worker stuff or just in general with, the Amazon stuff, hasn't done the best. So here's an alternative way to do it and still be venture backed and still make money. I tell people all the time, my long-term goal, I really want to have an electric jet because I want to have freedom to fly where I want to fly. And I want to own a good amount of acres so I can just run away and read books somewhere. In order to do that, I have to have money. So I'm not building a nonprofit. I'm building a very, very profitable company. But I'm saying that you don't have to do that on the backs of people. That you don't have to do it that way, that there is an alternative way. So more than anything, we hope to offer an alternative story to what success could mean within a capitalist structure.
Absolutely brilliant. I'm on board. Let's do it. So it has been an absolute delight to talk to you. I'm sure we could go on and on because this has been wonderful. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. Before we go, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners and let them know where they can find you?
Yeah. I think my only final thought would be continue to have ideals. I love this space of iteration, right? I never thought I was going to be a founder. I saw a hole. I had an ideal and I went after it and people believed in me. And I think that there's so much opportunity with where we're going in the future to allow more people to have ideals that are backed and that can be stood up, that it doesn't have to be created just by a subset of folks. We all can contribute to a better future. And you can find us at www.chargerhelp.com or just ChargerHelp on all your social media platforms.
Awesome. You have inspired me tremendously. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go change the world. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you, listeners, for joining us for this episode of PowerFlow Podcast. We'll catch you next time here at the whiteboard.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the PowerFlow Podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share the episode with other innovators, leave us a positive review, and subscribe to PowerFlow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find show notes for this episode, more great conversations, PowerFlow merchandise, and more at powerflowpodcast.com. PowerFlow is hosted by Amy Simpkins, produced by Devin Shonchuk, and managed by Laura Novak. See you next time here at the whiteboard.